Today's episode is brought to you by Fizzle, because sometimes being a business owner feels like bare naked bravery. Fizzle provides new entrepreneurs with a wealth of honest online business training and a community of fellow entrepreneurs who won't let you quit. You're listening to Bare Naked Bravery, a weekly podcast hosted by me, Emily Ann Peterson. This is the place where we expose the threads of heroism that stitch together the stories we admire most. As a musician, singer-songwriter, author, teaching artist, and business owner, I encounter some really fascinating stories. Every episode you'll hear features a revealing conversation with someone who courageously pours themselves out into the world. We'll talk about fears befriended, the terrors battled, and the courage created along our stories of bravery, quiet heroism, and all-out gutsiness. We open the Pandora's box of the dream-crushing constraints we all face during significant moments of bravery. These moments of bare naked bravery are rarely censored in real life, so if you're listening with little ears nearby, please know that some episodes may contain mature language and subject matter. The questions I ask today aren't scripted because I'm just curious. What is bravery? My hope for us all is that by listening to others search for and find their bravery, we will find our own. For that is what we need most, to know that we are not alone. The best way you can support the show is to share it with a friend or two. Send them an email, text, or tweet. Tag them in one of my Instagram posts. My handle's Emily Ann Pete. Or leave us a review on iTunes. It takes seconds and can be done from your phone right now. Bottom line, we need more bravery in the world. So let's be brave together. Today we get to talk with David Shriner-Cahn. He joins us all the way from New York and is an expert on how to smash plateaus. In fact, that's the title of his podcast, Smashing Plateaus. I am so curious to hear what he has to say about success and overcoming some of these obstacles that we think are kind of mammoth and unachievable, or the things that have smashed us down basically over and over and over. And we feel like maybe we are the plateau, not just that we have one. David is dedicated to helping business leaders remove roadblocks. And I think you'll hear that today in our conversation. We talk about asking the right questions when we're testing things. We talk about what success looks like. We talk about hustle. We talk about The Fifth Beetle, a new book. We talk about starting a business. And then David also has 3 takeaway points for where we find the wherewithal, which you have to stick around to listen to. Okay, are you ready for some bare naked?
Emily Ann, I'm ready.
Yes, let's do this. So, David, you are here because of many reasons, but first, you are the host of a podcast called Smashing the Plateau.
That's correct.
Tell us a little bit about how you got started with that.
Well, it actually goes back to the beginning of my business, which I started in 2006. Thinking after spending, probably close to 30 years as an employee, mostly in leadership and management roles, but really wanting to do my own thing. Started a business which was a very kind of simple consulting business model. And what I saw was the people who are in some kind of advisory or helping role who seem to get better business, more notoriety, were creating content. And I thought, well, it's time for me to join them. And we started doing content creation through a blog, which is pretty common, particularly today. Lots and lots of businesses have blogs. And one of the, when you're doing content creation or we're doing any kind of content creation is marketing, among other things. But when you're doing any kind of marketing, it's important to test. And one of the things that we did with the blog was testing the idea of increasing the frequency of the post to see if it would have an impact on the audience.
Why is testing your marketing important? I mean, I know.
Yeah, well, the idea for marketing is you want to get if you're trying to reach a particular target individual or target company, whether you're a B2C company or B2B company, if you're trying to reach a particular target, you're investing some time and money to try to do that. And it is important to understand what your return on investment is. So if you're trying a particular kind of campaign, or you're spending your own time networking, if you're a solo proprietor, or whatever you're doing, if you want to know how successful you are, and the only way to know how successful you are is to have some metrics around what it is you're trying to do. And a very common marketing test is called A/B testing, where you might try two different tactics and then compare the results.
I mean, it's very similar to like if a race runner were going to test out two different shoes to see if one shoe is going to make them run faster or not.
Exactly. You might not want to wear two different shoes on each, one on each foot at the same time.
But that's a good thing to bring up, is that sometimes just because you're testing doesn't mean the results are going to actually give you any sort of valuable feedback. If you're doing the wrong test.
Right. And it's also when you're testing, if you're testing as a comparison, you have a control group and you have a test group. When you're running tests, I have an engineering background, so I spent a lot of time in labs. And when you're testing, the way you choose your control group has some impact on the results of your test. So as an example, with our blog, what we did was we were, for the first, probably like year and a half, we were posting two written pieces a week. And then we decided we wanted to increase to 5 posts per week and see what impact it would have on the audience. Well, we couldn't compare posting 5 posts per week and 2 posts per week at the same time, because you can't actually do that with the same URL. So we had 2 posts per week for a period of time, and then we ramped up to 5 posts per week. And the content of the 5 posts was different than the content for the 2 posts. So it wasn't, an exact comparison. But when we went from 2 posts to 5 posts, we did see a big boost in audience.
Why do you think that's the case, that the more output you have or the more prolific you are, the more people you reach?
Well, I can kind of react based on what I do, which is, there are certain people whose ideas I think are good, and I like to follow them and see what they're up to. But like most people who are business owners, I have very limited time to actually do that. And like most people in business, and particularly those who are executives or business owners, we get tons and tons of email. And so the ability to actually read every single piece of email is impossible. So I'm pretty selective at what I actually will read. However, if there's somebody whose ideas I respect and value, and they're sending me content that is at a sort of pace that I can absorb, if they're sending the content once a week, I will notice it once a week. If they're sending me content every day, but it's still in a kind of a form that's absorbable, it's relatively short, I may click on it more frequently if it's coming in every day than if it comes in once a week. So the fact that it's more frequent doesn't annoy me depending upon who it's coming from. So my annoyance factor is really more proportional to who's sending it as opposed to how frequently it gets sent. And the opportunity for me to respond to it or maybe to share it with other people goes up if it's coming more frequently.
I also think that, in the art, music, creative world, when you are more prolific, whether the point of putting out a piece, be it a blog post or a song or a piece of artwork, you're testing all of your material, whether you want to or not, and kind of unintentionally.
That's right. You are. Yeah. So anyway, so getting back to your question about why the podcast. So we changed our frequency of our blog to 5 times a week. And to do that, we started engaging other thought leaders as part of the process, which I think also helped with the audience, because then those people who we featured were paying attention and sharing it with their colleagues and friends, etc. And the way we did it was by doing written interviews, which were pretty simple. They were relatively short posts. They were probably, 250 to 400 words each. So it was pretty easy to read and follow. And then we got some reaction from our audience, which was they wanted greater depth. And we, again, ran a test, which was, well, if they like the interview format, how can we do this and provide greater depth without investing a huge amount of more time and money on our part, and do it in a way that's still absorbable for the recipient? We decided to try audio interviews, which are podcasts.
Yep.
And it turns out that I kind of like doing them.
They're fun, aren't they?
Yeah. So it's not something that was on my radar screen at all. It's not something I thought that I would be doing or be good at. But it turned out that after trying it, it kind of caught on with me pretty quickly. And I really like asking people questions. It's like, that's what I do professionally. A lot of the way I work with clients is by asking probing questions and kind of leading them down a path so that there's sort of a self-revelation as part of the process. Because if a client wants to gain greater success, and gaining greater success is going to require some change in behavior on the part of the leader of the organization and all the people who follow the leader, then it's much more effective to lead everybody to that behavioral change through some probing questions, as opposed to saying, this is what you should do. Because if you keep telling them this is what you should do, people generally don't like to change their behavior. So they'll be resistant. And if you ask probing questions and kind of lead them on, it's a much more effective methodology. And so podcast kind of works in sync with that for me.
Do you have a favorite question for the podcast or for your clients? Like, do you find yourself always coming back to a common question?
Yeah, well, actually, one of my favorite questions is, well, what does success look like to you? And I've actually taught people to use that question. I had somebody who was a participant in a class that I gave, and this was actually training. It was a one session where I was a guest presenter for a group of clergy in a seminary. And I was there to talk to them about being entrepreneurial as clergy, because clergy person is a leader. And in today's world, particularly in America, where there's separation of church and state, if you are going to encourage people to follow your line of thinking and to gain some spirituality with your help, then it's a voluntary process. And I had a guest on my podcast once who talked about if you want to learn how to engage your employees, work with volunteers, because you can't force volunteers to do anything. And in reality, today's world, you can't really, yes, you do pay employees for what they do, but in reality, if you want employees to do a good job, it's not about forcing them to do something. It's about engaging them. And the same thing works with volunteers. Same thing. So if you're a clergy person, you want to be able to engage with people who follow you. And it's very much like what entrepreneurs do. So I talk to them about success and what does success look like to you, and what does success look like to the people you serve. And one of the people who was in the class, who had been a spiritual leader for a long time, changed her approach in how she dealt with the people. And she primarily does a lot of teaching in her work. And so she changed how she started off with new people in her classes. And she said it totally transformed the outcome.
By starting her class or her relationship with her new students with what does success look like to you?
Right. Really, this is like a family-based program. Mm-hmm. And so you're dealing not only with the dynamic of the teacher and the students, but you're dealing with the dynamic of what's happening inside the family, because each person who's the member of the family is there for a different reason. And so if you start out by asking what does success look like, then you're going to get a different answer from each member of the family. And if you can cater how you then guide your educational program to meet the specific needs that your students have expressed, you're going to get a much better outcome. And the same thing is true when you're leading a business. If you start off by asking your customers, what does success look like to you? And you design everything you do for them based on their definition of success, your chances of having a mismatch of expectations between you and the customer are greatly reduced. I do the same thing with my clients, but also for me, it's because I want them to understand what it is they're really trying to achieve, because the work that we do is really geared to help them be more successful in their own businesses. So it's sort of compounding that understanding of success. So that's what I find is a really
I can see how that would really help people. I mean, I know that your podcast is all about smashing the plateau, but that's also what your clients are trying to do as well. They're trying to like bust through the thing that they've been bumping up against for forever. And I can completely see how being success driven rather than obstacle driven kind of removes the obstacle in and of itself.
It does. And also when we talk about what success looks like and we probe a little bit, very often some of the factors that they can't come up with are not what they thought.
What do you mean?
Well, very often business owners, particularly people who've been in business for a while, one of the reasons why they may get frustrated with where they are, like you take somebody who's, let's say, a 45-year-old who has been in business for 20 years, maybe not this particular business, but been an entrepreneur for 20 years. Clearly, the person has had some success. Otherwise, the person wouldn't still be in business, because we know most businesses fail within the first year. So they've beaten the odds. They're still in business. They've had some success. If they have employees, they certainly have some success, because they're able to not only feed themselves, but they're feeding their employees, families. And very often they're in a kind of plateau where they aspire for their company to be bigger than it is. And they generally will think about it first in financial terms. Like, my company is X millions of dollars in sales, and I'd like it to be, 2 times the size or 5 times the size or 10 times the size. And it's been at this level for the last 5 years, and I can't seem to get it bigger. I've got it to $5 million. I can't seem to get it to 10. I've got it to $1 million. I can't seem to get it to 3. So it's not about putting food on the table.
Right. And that problem is not just monetarily in business. It happens elsewhere too. Like even just in bravery as a concept, as a whole, like when I've thought I felt brave, or like, yes, I'm a brave person in these areas, and maybe even this area to this other area. But in this other area, I keep trying to be brave, or I keep trying and attempting to do something differently. And it's like I'm yelling at a wall. I'm not getting through, or not making the progress that I thought I would make. So what is it that is the success-driven start?
Some of the answers that I will hear from people after we do some probing might involve, I want to be able to have a place where employees can grow. So it's not that they come in at a certain level, a certain job, and they work for me for 2 or 3 years, and then they're going to move on because there's no way for them to advance. I want a place where, I have one client who talks about this frequently. I want a place where lower wage workers can come in and do a good job, be respected, and support their families. And it's not just about clocking in and clocking out. And I want them to be proud of their work. And if they want to be able to advance, there's a way for them to do it. And I want to be able to provide the kind of training where if they want to move from being a laborer to a tradesman, they can do it. And we will help them. I want to be able to give back to my community. I want to be able to spend more time with my family, have the right kind of work-life balance, particularly if you're in that place where you're feeling stuck. Working harder doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be more successful. Generally, it just makes you feel more stuck.
It's no secret that I offer mentorship to creatives, entrepreneurs, and other folks looking to build their bravery. But when a business owner is simply in need of some really straightforward training and camaraderie, I send them to the guys at Fizzle. Fizzle is an online membership site which helps entrepreneurs grow their business, revenue, and fulfillment until they're crackling with creativity, impact, potential, and purpose. Now, there are two definitions of the word fizzle. Did you know? The first is to fail in a weak and disappointing way, which is actually what most businesses end up doing. But the second definition is to buzz or crackle like an exposed electrical wire. And you know what? You wouldn't hear all that buzzing or crackling and fizzling if there weren't an intense amount of energy or potential in those wires. The Fizzle community exists because, number one, it's hard to build a good online business. Most ideas fizzle out. And number two, for the entrepreneurial type like myself, there's a lot of energy and potential running through the wires. Everyone inside Fizzle is putting their butt on the line to build something they care about. And when you own a business, it's natural to hit roadblocks, lose steam, search for direction. But Fizzle helps its members get clarity and take the very next step. They've got some really excellent courses from real experts and a community of like-minded business builders. The courses all focus on concrete, actionable steps. The community is incredible, and there's no smarmy tactics or marketing schemes, just real people building honest websites, products, and services. If you've ever worked on a project alone, you know how much of a game changer an active community makes. It's easy to join Fizzle. Your first 2 weeks are free. After that, if you choose to stick with it, membership is only $35 a month. Visit barenaked.bravery.com/Fizzle to get started. That's Fizzle. Let me ask you this. Are you pro-hustle or anti-hustle?
What do you mean by hustle? What's your definition of hustle?
That's a good question. When I think of the word hustle, I usually think about like the stressful, I gotta get it done, or like buying into the endless to-do list that our industry or colleagues or whoever says that we need to get done.
I'm actually
bias. You can tell my bias already.
Well, on the one hand, I don't believe that there is any. I think get rich quick doesn't work. If you're in it for the long haul, you can build success, and you can build satisfaction. You can build something that's rewarding. You can build wealth. Those kinds of things don't happen overnight. On the other hand, I think not only is it important to have balance in your life and the way you work. I think that's really important. It's like, if you look at human history, there was this concept that was created at some point thousands of years ago of having a day of rest. Why is that so important? There's something that it does for you physically and emotionally and probably strategically that's really important. And we live in a world that is, particularly with the internet, that's very 24/7. And I think that that's a problem. I'm a big proponent of the strategies that are embodied in the book, The One Thing by Gary Keller, which if your listeners don't know, I strongly suggest that you check out. It's based on the 80-20 rule of life and business, which in a nutshell is 80% of our success comes from 20% of our input. And so if you think about these long to-do lists and the hustle, in reality, if you could identify the 20% on your to-do list that is going to lead to 80% of your success, you can scrap the other 80% on your to-do list and you'll do just fine.
Right. Oh
So
man.
that's my reaction to hustle. I think it's very hard to achieve. I struggle with it myself all the time. My to-do list is always way too long. And I try to coach myself on, well, if I don't get to this other stuff, is it really important?
The other day I heard somebody quoting probably something like Ram Dass about the to-do list is just a list of things, a list of ways that you cannot be in the present moment.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I prefer to rephrase the to-do list as a success list. If you could identify one thing you could do today that would really increase the success that you would have today, what is it?
That's a great question.
Yeah, and it's very hard in our culture, I think, to just focus on that one thing. Very hard.
Yeah. I have recently we discussed with Danielle Cohen. She's a previous guest on the podcast, and a photographer, and she beautiful photographer. But she and I were talking about the book, The Essentialist, and this concept of what's the one thing that you should be focusing on, and how can you go forward and bring that essentialism into everything that you're doing in your business and in your life. I think that the what's the one thing is a fantastic.
Yeah, sort of like, I think it very much ties into the way marketing works, which is very counterintuitive. In marketing, the narrower your offering is, the greater you're going to be able to penetrate your market. And most people, when they start off in business, they think, okay, I'm a photographer. Well, who's your target audience? Who do you photograph? Well, I can photograph anybody. Well, actually, that's not going to help you market very much.
Right.
But if you focus on photographing pregnant women in their last trimester, you're going to get a lot more business because people understand that. They go, oh, I know somebody who's pregnant, who's approaching her last trimester. Let's see if I can connect you, because she's going to want photographs because she's not going to be pregnant that much longer.
Right. Yeah, it's the focus that we need in whatever we're pursuing and in however we're trying to be brave. That focus is so crucial.
Yeah.
So crucial. Okay, so let's do this now. I would like to hear from you about your personal experience with bravery.
Sure.
Which I know is a huge, huge subject and probably spans the entirety of your life. But do you have a top 2 or top 3 list of most brave moments that you can?
Yeah, well, I can certainly share a few brave moments in my business life.
Sure.
Generally, the bigger transitions that I've made, or biggest transitions that I've made, have required some bravery. I think that's true for most people. So starting my business when I had never run a business before was something, and it's interesting actually when I reflect back on these kind of transitions. So I started my business in 2006, having never run a business before. And, we don't know what we don't know, but it was a time in my life when, there was a fair amount of risk at stake, because sort of middle-aged and paying lots of tuitions, the financial stresses were pretty high. So, so there's some risk to doing that. And most people that I knew who weren't entrepreneurs thought I was crazy and didn't hesitate to tell me that. I made a major professional shift early on in my life. I studied engineering and worked as an engineer for a few years. And then I went into nonprofit management, community service without the educational background. So it was like, I studied engineering for 7 years, had good degrees from good schools, invested a lot of time and money in that, and then sort of scrapped it all to do something that, again, people who knew me, who kind of didn't follow a similar path, thought I was crazy. And, in the end, it's like when you're really true to who you are and you follow what is right for who you are, you're much better off. having the capacity to do that takes a lot of wherewithal. So I would equate that with bravery. And there have been occasions when I've had to do that in my personal life with relationships. It's like when you're in a position where you need to stand up for what you believe in, even though it has the potential for impacting personal relationships, which could end up impacting them in an adverse way. Sometimes you have to do that. And it's generally better not to let those things fester, I find. So there have been a bunch of times in my life when I've experienced what you might term bravery.
Where do you think one finds that wherewithal? Either finds it or nurtures, or how do they nurture it?
It really helps to have some kind of support system that believes in you, because one of the things that I've learned over the course of my professional life, having dealt with some people who are, one would consider quite successful, and also in my business, I've done the same. I find that everyone has self-doubts. I don't care how successful you are or how successful you are perceived by some mass of people. I've yet to meet somebody, it's sort of that the top of the ladder that people are observing who doesn't have some self-doubt. And when you're contemplating either changing your behavior or making some significant change in your life, your business, your routine, your environment, the self-doubt really creeps in. So having somebody who can support you emotionally as you're going through that is really important, whether it's a life partner, family member, friend, colleague. I think most of us have developed those relationships over time. Those are really important. It's why mastermind groups are so important, because it's all about having a small cadre of people who trust and support you. And when I've interviewed people for my podcast, particularly people who've been in business for decades, they generally have a cadre of people who have been part of their close-knit circle for most of their business lives. So the support's really important. I would say another thing that's really helpful is looking at people who are ahead of you in your own life journey, business journey, and seeing people that you admire and kind of having a list in your head and maybe written down of people who represent kind of multiple, really diverse aspects of life whom you admire. They may not all be financially successful. They may not consider themselves to be successful, but they have achieved certain things or taken certain paths that you would like to take, and you admire them for having the courage or the bravery to do so. So if you look at those people as role models, whether or not you actually, this is actually true, whether or not you've actually met them is important. I had a guest twice on my podcast, Vivek Tiwari, who's an incredible human being who talks about having a historical mentor. So he wrote the book, The Fifth Beatle, about Brian Epstein, who was the manager of the Beatles. And he talks about Brian as being his historical mentor. He never met Brian, but Brian has basically guided a huge amount of what Vivek has done in his professional life. So you can have people who you haven't met, but you admire, and you can look to them for guidance to see what they've done and how they've achieved what they've achieved. And of course, if there are people that you can actually talk to, that's even better.
I mean, having mentors and role models is equally crucial as that focus. One of the funny things, a lot of people don't know this, but in my music studio, I have a stack of framed records, LPs, of artists that I, like Bob Dylan, Dolly Parton, Joni Mitchell, the whole gang. And they're all on the wall above my piano near in the room that I'm making all the music. And it really does help to, when you get stuck with a line, for me, when I get stuck with a line of a lyric, and I just look up at the wall and go, what would you do, Dolly? Or what would you do, Bob?
Yeah.
having that, like, God, I'm stuck. What would you guys do? And going back through everything you know of their repertoire or everything you know of their success is a great teacher to have.
It certainly is. And they've had points when they've been stuck too.
Definitely. Okay, so we have a support system and looking ahead to your heroes.
Yes.
Was there any more that you want to add to that list of where we find the wherewithal?
Take time out on a regular basis to dream.
Why?
Because it's really hard to imagine something significantly better than where you are now when you're in the midst of that to-do list.
Yep.
So that's why vacations are so important, because vacations separate you from the day-to-day for a long enough chunk of time that you're able to unwind and give your mind a chance to relax and imagine some major improvements. Like, we very often will come back from vacation and we're like invigorated to really go forward on a new path.
It's true. There's an awesome TED Talk about sabbaticals that I love. The 7-year sabbatical, basically. So every 7 years, taking a year off.
Yeah.
Doing something completely different. I mean, that's an extreme example, but every 6 days, we get to take that day off, that Sunday, that Sabbath, or the mini vacation to cut ourselves or to like cocoon ourselves for a bit.
Yeah. So I think taking time out to dream is really important.
Yeah, I agree. Well, this has been so fantastic having you on the show. I'm so glad you got to make it work and join us.
Oh, thank you so much for asking me to be on the show, Emily Ann. It's been great to be here, discuss bravery. And we could all use a little more bravery in our lives.
Oh, we definitely could. Just never too much of it. It's really refreshing hearing from someone who has witnessed so much success and has coached so many people through to their success, that sometimes the simple things like our support system and having role models and taking the time out to dream, those are simple, but they actually have so much potency in our bravery and how we live our lives. Today's brave takeaway is 3 questions about those 3 things. The first question about your support system. What is your support system? If you were to draw a net of your support, who would be holding each end of the net for you? The second question is looking ahead to your heroes. If you were going to do something like I do, which is have like a wall of saints for yourself, who would be on that wall? And maybe if you want to get super woo-woo and crazy about it, you can print off their pictures or put them on a wall or put them somewhere to remind you that you have help when you need it. You just have to ask for it. Okay, the third question is take time out to dream. So today, I just want you to take 5 minutes to do nothing. Just lay there and do nothing and let your brain unwind. And sometimes the 5 minutes will feel like it's definitely not enough, but it really does help give a moment of breath into our busy days. I want to thank David Shriner-Cahn again for joining us. If you are curious in listening to his podcast, I've posted a couple links to the episode with Vivek Tiwari, who wrote the book The Fifth Beatle. You can listen to those 2 episodes, and then there are also links to David's podcast, Smashing the Plateau, which is available on iTunes and all the other places. You can also check him out on Twitter and LinkedIn, and on our show notes, there are also links to purchase the books The One Thing by Keller and The Fifth Beatle as well. One of the best ways that you can support Bare Naked Bravery is to leave a review on iTunes or your other favorite podcast apps. I wanted to thank JInky1 on iTunes for their review. They said, "It takes guts to seek and share stories like these, and many of us can benefit from them. It's not easy stepping outside of your comfort zone, but Emily Ann Peterson does, and she introduces us to many others she meets there. Well done." Thank you so much for that review. It really does help us out a lot. If you want to know how you can help the show, there are a couple ways that you can, and they're all at the bottom of today's show notes. Some of them don't require you leaving a review on iTunes, so there are other ways that you can help the show. Specifically, just sharing this episode with a friend. If you've listened to this show and you like what David said about success and plateau smashing, and you know of somebody else who would too, then just share this thing with them. So that's our show this week. Thank you again for listening. We've put all the links in the show notes from today's episode, which you can find at barenakedbravery.com. And again, if you've enjoyed listening to this episode as much as we've enjoyed making it for you, then give us a review, rate us, support the show. There are all sorts of ways you can do that. And if you haven't yet, you should download the Bare Naked Bravery coloring book because it's so stinking cool and it's worth you checking out. You can go see all of that at barenakedbravery.com/color. Maybe that could be one of your ways to take time out and dream this week. Just a suggestion. If you're digging the music in today's episode, that's because it's brought to you by my friends at Music Box Licensing, a premier creative music agency dedicated to finding and crafting unique soundtracks. To find out more about all the artists, musicians, and other sponsors of the show, just go to barenakedbravery.com/sponsors. I'm really looking forward to being with you next week because we have some really great things in store for you. Until then, I have one message for you. It's this. Be yourself. Be vulnerable. Be brave, because the world needs more of your bare naked bravery.